My name is Roy King. I'm a senior product marketing manager, part of the Office 365 security and compliance team. My day job now, though, is looking after the GDPR for all of Microsoft 365. And so after you actually hear from the engineers and the people doing the work, I'll show you some more marketing slides and talk about some of the other work that we're doing across Microsoft to help you with your compliance.
All right. My name is Deepak. I'm a program manager in the Office 365 information protection team. I've been doing retention, archiving, a little bit of the data protection stuff, threat intel for the past 6 years, and I work in the engineering team at Redmond. And how many of you have attended any of my sessions before, either at Ignite or MEC? Yeah, anyone? A few of you have. So I have this superstition of starting all my sessions with a photo of the best climb I did this year, just for the fun of it. This was pretty cool because this is out in Seattle. What you see over there is Mount Rainier. So please do visit Seattle. It's better than Orlando. It's really nice. Anyway, since we are ready to get started, mandatory slide, what is GDPR? There are 4 points that we want everyone to take away, which is you've got the privacy rights, protection of data, breach reporting, and penalties for non-compliance. I think in our introduction slide, I want to make sure I also point this out. If you look at the bottom, this presentation is intended to provide an overview, and it's not a definitive statement of the law. Any lawyers in the house? No, right?
Not us.
Not us, exactly. And so I do want to make sure that whatever I'm saying over here, whatever I'm saying over here, Roy is saying over here is not taken as legal opinion. We are working with CELA inside Microsoft to come up with all the stuff that we are showing you. But at the same time, we want to make sure that you go back to your law team and figure out what the requirements are for your own organization. All right. So what does success look for you guys? Because you're all sitting here in this session. At least I want you to go away with, you need to know what you need to do to be GDPR ready from a proactive standpoint. Secondly, what do you need to continue to monitor once GDPR goes live? And then finally, what do you have in the Office 365 toolkit that lets you respond to GDPR, either data subject requests or breaches when they happen? I want you to understand at the end of this session what exactly you will take away. I have a tiny bullet over there, which is licensing, because every time Roy and I go present this, the most common question that gets asked is, how much does all this cost? And Roy will cover a big part of that in the end. The short answer to that is M365. But we'll go into more details at the end of this. OK, really simple. What is the GDPR checklist? If you're here, you want to go back to wherever you came from and say, this is what we need to do for GDPR. The first thing you need to do, you need to protect your data in Office 365. And we are talking about Office 365 over here, but then Roy and we will also talk about how this spreads to all other pieces of the Microsoft ecosystem. But the point is, you need to protect your data. You also need to govern your data. What does that mean? When there is a data subject request, you need to show evidence of retention, a policy surrounding your data. So you need to set up proactive stuff for that. The third thing, you need to protect your users. Now, in Office 365, when we talk about all our protection scenarios, the focus of our protection is usually around the data. Even when we say, prevent your user from getting attacked, what is actually happening is those attackers are going after the user's data. But we do have scenarios where ransomware or phishing attempts, which end up actually compromising the user themselves. And so we do have features in Office 365 to help you do that. I'll walk you through that. And then number 4, breach detection, investigation, and remediation. This is important because it is actually a big point in GDPR, which is when the breach happens, you need to notify all the people who are affected and make sure that they are notified how much of the data is lost. It's an important piece of the GDPR regulation. And then finally, data subject requests and how you can actually handle those. Now, the elephant in the room when it comes to GDPR is, what is personal data? Anybody here wants to take an attempt of what is personal data? Anyone? Sure?
Anything connected to living human beings.
Yeah, that is a great definition. It doesn't tell you anything from an engineering standpoint what that means, right? So we in Office 365 and across Microsoft have been mulling over this for too long now. So this is the framework that we've come up with. And I'll walk you through a little bit of this. So the first thing, which is, you've got some sort of identification, a pattern that we can recognize. We can use machine learning. We can use algorithms, et cetera, et cetera. There are a bunch of things that we can do with that. But that does not fully cover what personal data is, because if you see there, you've got a name, an ID, and social security number, or a national ID, or a passport number, or a driving license number. Those things you can do pretty effectively with what we have in Office 365 today. We'll make enhancements. I'll talk about that a little bit. But there are other things that when you talk about personal data, if you look at number 2, what are people talking about me? This particular thing comes up all the time under even the DPA, which is inside an organization, you may have a disgruntled employee. And that employee might use GDPR and say, I need to know what this person was talking about me, because I think that is the reason I got a bad review this year. GDPR lets them go and exercise that right. So that's number 2. Now, number 3, and this is the one that gets the most publicity in the media right now, because what are all the activities that I'm doing? I read this article yesterday about how Tinder gave a person who asked for their personal data 800 pages of information. I think there was another guy from who asked Facebook, and Facebook gave him 5,000 pages of information. Now, in Office 365, what does that mean? And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Number 4, personal photos, like the photo that I had earlier. That's me. It's personal, but it's right now in my Microsoft account. That is still personal data. There isn't really a great way of figuring out what that personal data is. And again, this is not meant to be exhaustive. I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys what personal data means in your organization as well. And we can discuss that afterwards. If you guys have the time, you should hang out and talk to the both of us. So let me talk about number 1. So this is the list. If you look at the GDPR list, you've got account numbers, file numbers, blah, 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 online artifacts, which are IP address for all of the EU member states. Now, in Microsoft, we are going after this, which is we'll create a bunch of sensitive information types. Once you create the sensitive information types, we'll go after the patterns, and we'll say, OK, we found personal data. Now, we can't actually attribute this to a particular user, because that is hard. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The second one, what are people talking about me? The simple answer to that is e-discovery. Again, I'll go into more details on this. Now, the third one, which is give me all the activities that I've been doing in Office 365. This is the kind of information that Microsoft is probably going to provide you if you ask for it, which is for one user, one email, you're going to get 8,000 pages of data. For a Skype call with 3 meeting attendees, you're going to get, again, 7,500 pages of data. This is a problem, right? I'll again go into the more details of what we plan to do around here, because it is September and we have time till May, and Roy will walk you through what are the other milestones that we are coming up with, where we'll provide more and more information about this stuff. All right, so I'm going to go walk into the checklist. So now, until now, any questions? Otherwise, what I'm going to do is effectively going to be walking through a laundry list of all the features that we have, because at the end of the day, more important than me being at the session and presenting to you, the big collateral for you is the slide deck. Because once you download the slide deck, every feature that is going to help you put a check against GDPR is in the slide deck. You can refer to the deck, go look at the sessions, because all of these things that I'm going to be talking about are a 1 hour, 15-minute session each. So there is no way I can do justice to actually going through each one of those features. But what I'll try to do is at least spend 2 or 3 minutes on each feature so you guys get an idea, and then go back and look at that. So I apologize if this is going to be a lot of stuff going to be thrown at you, but I want to do the best I can to equip you when you go back.
It's the GDPR. It's all we can do.
Yeah. GDPR for me is scarier than climbing that mountain, honestly, because there's so much to do. All right. So data protection. So how many of you attended the Microsoft Information Protection session by Gagan Gulati? OK, for those who did not, I would definitely recommend going and watching that session, because when we talk about data protection in Office 365 or in the boundaries of Microsoft, these are the things that we usually talk about, which is data needs to be encrypted if it leaves the boundary. The data, when it is being shared, needs to make sure that you're not sharing with somebody who's not supposed to be getting it, preferably outside the organization or even internally within teams that are not supposed to be seeing the data. Your cloud app access, what that does is it gives you the capability across all the other cloud applications that you have, not just Office 365. App access, again, these are apps that are representing Microsoft. So SharePoint app on the phone, for example, you don't want them to, you don't want your users to actually access the data or download the data from an unmanaged device or an IP address that is blocked. Finally, those two, which are policy tips and visual markings like a header, a footer, or a watermark, which effectively help tell the user, hey, you're dealing with sensitive data. You should not be sharing it outside. And then finally, the retention part that I talked about, which is you need it in order to ensure that when the DSR comes in, you have a clear message saying, this is what my retention policy is. How did we actually do this, or how are we going to do this? It's through this concept of a label. It's a really simple concept, which is you apply a label on a document. You can apply it three ways. You can apply it automatically, you can recommend it to the user, or the user manually decides to go apply it. And what happens once you apply the label? All the things that I talked about in the previous slide. And that's pretty much it. That is what the Microsoft Information Protection story is going to be. What I'll show you is over here is the admin portal for creating a label. So let me zoom in here and show you. Really simple. So if you see here, these are the actions that will apply once you apply the label. So you've got the block users from sending the data outside, policy tips, send an incident report, and advanced protection, which is basically encrypt the data when it leaves Office 365. You can also say, I want to retain this data for a certain amount of time. You can apply watermarks. You can apply headers. You can apply footers. All of this is unified under one label infrastructure. And then the second part of this, which is I can also go and say, I want to automatically apply this label based on a bunch of conditions. And the conditions are what I showed you earlier, which is the sensitive information types. Now, if you remember, go back to number 1, personal data type number 1. All I'll say is, if it matches data type personal data number 1, then go do all those actions, which is effectively apply the label on it, and then those things just automatically happen. So that's the Microsoft Information Protection story. Now, what does that look like for the end user? In SharePoint, really simple, go select a document. You can go apply a label. In Exchange, again, either Outlook or OA, go select an email, apply the label, and when the label is applied, you can see that this particular email with an attachment contains sensitive data. Don't share it outside. We're integrating this into Mac, so into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and all the client applications, so users can go apply the label and get the information on what that content should be treated as in a really simple and straightforward way. But it's not just Microsoft stuff. You can also go into CAS and say, if you've got Box, and this particular piece of information that just got uploaded to Box matches those sensitive information types, go ahead and apply the label, and therefore it'll be encrypted, it'll be protected, and Box will have to implement a few things, but we're working with them to figure those things out. Finally, Windows. We've got the scanner app where, again, same thing. If it matches these conditions, go apply a label. We've got the scanner app that will go find all the items in your file system, in your laptops, et cetera. Go apply the label on those documents. Same protection in Windows as well. So this is our data protection story. Any questions about this? If not, I'll keep going. We also introduced in this Ignite message encryption, so really easy to actually send encrypted messages now to not just within your organization, but also between your organization and personal emails, such as Gmail, etc. So this is pretty cool to have. We've also got BYOK and HYOK to ensure that the encryption stuff works for you and your organization. So pretty strong data protection solution right now. What about devices? Again, we've got an Intune story. We've got MDM in Office 365. Based on this, you can enforce remote actions, password PIN enforcement. So by doing all these things, what you're effectively controlling is your data across Office 365. So that was the protection part. Now, when it comes to retention, again, the story for Office 365 is pretty straightforward. For GDPR, what you need to do is show evidence of retention. And what that means is you have to create an org-wide policy that simply says, I want to retain my data for a certain number of years, after which the data will be disposed of. In 3 clicks, you can do that in Office 365. If there's time, I'll show you a demo in the end, but that's pretty much it. As long as you do that, you are GDPR ready. Now, for people who have more advanced retention requirements, again, the label is the solution. We've introduced a bunch of records management solutions, such as manually reviewing those documents that are coming up for disposal, and then saying, yes, it is OK, which means it's audited at that point. We've also got employee supervision, where scenarios like insider trading can be monitored. Again, labels come in there. You can say if it matches these conditions, apply a label, and ensure that a certain number of those emails get sent to a supervisor so that those items are viewed and then they're approved as either compliant or not compliant. Again, this was a 1 hour, 15-minute session. MIP was a 1 hour, 15-minute session. You guys should definitely go watch those things. Any questions about data protection or data retention? Good. OK.
They got it.
Yep. All right. The next piece, user protection. So how many of you have heard of risk-based conditional access? So a good number of people. I'll take a little bit of time to explain this. Within Office 365, all your users, we categorize them either as high-risk, medium-risk, or low-risk users. And how do we do that? It's basically based on the signals that we get from a bunch of scenarios that we have. So a privileged user could simply be a person in the C-suite, or somebody who's reporting to the CEO. They're a privileged user. If the credentials are found in public, if they're accessing through a sensitive application, unmanaged devices, malware, botnet, impossible travel. This is a great scenario where all your logins are coming from Orlando, and then suddenly you get a login 10 minutes later from South India. It's just physically impossible to do that, right? So those signals, again, we take, and then we determine whether the user is at risk or the session is at risk. And based on the risk level, we've got a bunch of solutions for you, which is we allow the access, or we require multi-factor authentication. We force a password reset for a high-risk scenario. We absolutely deny access in those high-risk scenarios, or limit the access if they're coming from, let's say, an unmanaged device or an IP. Again, very, very solid protection. This is all under EMS. I think there was also an EMS session where they talked in detail about this, but definitely go check it out. The controls that we have for AAD are pretty cool. The second piece of it, which again comes from experience, is most of the data is actually lost, or most users are compromised because of administration and administrators not having the right access control. So a privileged identity management solution, what effectively does is sets a timer on how long the administrator continues to enjoy the privilege for high access, high activity. And after a certain point of time, that privilege is taken away. This actually has helped many of our customers who've suffered from breaches before. This particular feature has been extremely helpful. So I would, again, recommend checking this out. All right, so we talked about data protection. We talked about data governance. We talked about user protection. We also want to talk about preventing those data breaches. So again, I've got a bunch of features that I'm going to walk through, and I'll address all 4 of these, which is how do we prevent the breaches, how do we detect a breach when it happens, and then the important piece of GDPR is the investigation, and then finally the remediation. But before I go here, I've talked about data protection and data governance. It does not mean that only personal data needs to be protected or only personal data needs to be governed. And that's the thing I want to make sure people take away from this, which is you need to protect all your data, all your sensitive data, and you need to protect all your users. It's not just because of GDPR, it's not just that personal data types are alone important or the others are not less important. So when you look at it from the first 2 scenarios, you need to have a holistic view of your data across your organization. Let's talk about breach. So we've got what is called Office 365 threat protection, and under that, we've got 3 features. We've got Exchange Online Protection, we've got ATP, or Advanced Threat Protection, and finally, we've got Threat Intel. What is Exchange Online Protection? This is the basic email protection that we have. It's a native capability of Exchange Online. Main things that we offer, basic malware protection. We block spam. We're also introducing a bunch of new efforts for anti-phish. But more importantly, if you see the Office 365 environment now, we've now got a secure a dashboard for centralized management. And let me zoom in and show you a little bit of what that looks like. I'm sorry. See, that works. Yes. So we give you information on how many threats were blocked. We give end users the ability to report spam and malware that they've received. If there is an increase in spam, we tell you exactly why that happens. And if you see here, for example, it's probably an incorrect mail flow rule that you've set up that actually has triggered the increase in spam. There are also insights about how there are a specified number of users who are being targeted, and also a bunch of user accounts that may have been compromised. So all of these, again, are available in Office 365 as part of EOP. The second piece of this is ATP. Now, with ATP, it's our fastest growing security service that we have in Office 365. It's part of Office 365 E5. And I can tell you that the ATP usage is more than 3 times the nearest competitor that we have. And the best part about ATP usage is that the more ATP our customers use, the rest of the customers get to benefit from that as well because it's all ML algorithms that are running over here. So what do we have under ATP? The first thing is safe links. Again, these are scenarios where you get a phishing email and your users go click on a link and then they're taken to a malicious site that steals all their stuff. With ATP, we've got a jump in the middle where we actually scan the website and then say, okay, this website's good to go. And then finally, we send you off on to the good websites. Zero-day protection against malicious attachments. What this means, how many of you know the term zero-day? Oh, you guys are all pros. OK. For the folks who don't, Microsoft is usually the first target of a attack that nobody has ever seen before. And so we've invested significantly in making sure that even though we've not got the signatures in time, we will be able to actually address those by having a detonation chamber where the message comes in. We're able to strip the attachment, detonate it inside, make sure it's OK, and then finally deliver it. But the cool thing that we can do over here is the stuff that gets delivered to your mailbox, usually without ATP, the attachment scanning takes probably a couple of minutes or a few minutes. With ATP, you get the email delivered instantly, which means less support calls for your IT department saying, hey, this mail was sent to me, the guy sent to me from next to me, why has it not come yet? It's probably because of ATP. But with ATP, you will get the message. There'll be an attachment saying the attachment is being scanned, and we've significantly reduced the time that it takes to scan the attachment and deliver the verdict. So we've done a bunch of work in ATP over there. A couple of things I want to call out, which is we've now expanded ATP to SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams as well. So it's not just Exchange. And you should go check out those sessions because the demos are incredibly cool. Finally, threat intel. This is the place where you can actually come in and get visibility into how hackers are actually trying to get into your organization. The cool thing about this is we integrate with Office, Windows, and Azure, and we also integrate with all our other partners outside of Office and Microsoft. We've got some amazing dashboards. There is an ATP session going on right now, unfortunately, but I would encourage you to go watch it afterwards. I'll try to see if I can get a couple of demos in just to give you guys an idea of what ATP looks like. We've also got the threat tracker and trend insights. These are self-explanatory. When the threat comes in, you're able to actually go investigate. So this is where using, let me actually go to I'll jump ahead a little bit and show you this slide. So this is where we strengthen our ecosystem basically based on information that we get from Azure, based on user logins, from devices as Windows, and then our email system. And we feed this information pretty much across all our security services for breach. So when the breach happens, we instantly know what caused the breach, and therefore it makes it really easy for you guys, especially to comply with GDPR, to go investigate, find out who's been affected, and then go notify those people because all you have is 72 hours. And so we give a bunch of features for you for breach detection, breach investigation, and remediation so that you can go do the work that you need to do. There were a couple of slides that I skipped that I want to quickly talk about, which is ASM, which is now called Office 365 Cloud Security. Again, this was an acquisition that we did, I think 2 years ago, where it is not just Microsoft Cloud that we cover, but also a bunch of other cloud services that we cover. This one's specific for Microsoft. We've got a bunch of advanced alerts over here. But if you look at CAS itself, you can go see that the stuff that I talked about earlier with Google, Box, Dropbox, SAP, any other cloud services that you have, you can use CAS to monitor your risk across all of those services. So that's the breach story. Any questions about breach? Yes? They're going in preview right now, yes. So again, since I'm not the expert on ATP, I would definitely go check out the session afterwards. It's going on right now. Phil's doing it. And you should go see what their timelines are because I'm pretty sure he's got a roadmap slide in his session.
And I think if you put in, if you just search for Ignite ATP announcements, you'll see there's a blog post that's got a bunch of that new stuff out too.
Yeah. So again, this is where you need to get into the details. It's a great question. Phil's going to be there after his session. I would definitely recommend if you have questions, I will direct you guys to the right people. All of you can contact me for any GDPR-related questions. Like I said, the people who are doing all these features are all in touch with me. So I will direct you guys to the right people, and you can get all your questions answered.
All your product technical questions.
Yeah, all product technical questions. It is something that we are actively looking into. I can tell you that. Yes. All right. Data subject requests. First question, because how many of you actually have a DSR policy? Raise of hands, please. Oh, my God.
We lost the PowerPoint. It's trying again.
Let's see. This is the presentation, isn't it? Oh, my God. Five. There it is. Yes. Yeah.
I'll do it again.
All right. The reason I'm asking you this question is because the e-discovery PM is on a flight right now back to Israel, and he wanted to know how many people actually have a DSR policy. So raise of hands, please.
Data
No?
subject request.
You guys have a policy within your organization. Okay, let me explain what that means. So I'll put this here. And I'll have to do a show of hands exercise for this. How many of you, if an employee comes to your organization and says, give me all my data, will say, yes, I will give you all your data? Raise of hands, please. There is one guy. Yes. Okay. Good to know. Okay. Great. B, how many of you will say, no, we're definitely not going to say okay to all your data, but if you give us specific information on what you're looking for, then we will accommodate your request? Raise of hands, please. How many people is that?
40, that's about 30% of the, 40% of the room.
Okay, so 40% of the room. Number 3, no request will be accommodated because it's all work product. Anyone? There are people. Okay,
Yeah,
so
see, half dozen. Yeah.
so you realize now what trouble I am in, right? There is, what do I build for? A, B, C, or D? The lowest common denominator, unfortunately for me, is A. So that's what we are going to be going after. But the answer I want to give for all you folks who want to know what Microsoft is doing for DSR is, we will focus on B first. We will make sure we get B right, and we will continue to develop so that we can support A eventually. And you'll see that in our roadmap, because this is exactly what we've been hearing from other customers as well. Now, for the folks who said, or you who said, yeah, the one guy who said, yes, I will accommodate, if you don't mind, which country and which company, if I may ask?
I'm from the Netherlands.
Okay.
I might have understood your question the wrong way.
Okay.
The reason I answered yes is because you are obligated by law as an engineer with the GDPR to comply to a data subject request. That's why if somebody comes to my company and says, I want to know, A, do you have data regarding my person?
Yeah.
B, what is it?
Yeah.
You're obligated to give it to me.
You're obligated to give it to them under conditions. And that's the thing. It's always the under certain conditions part. You can say, there are reasons why I cannot do this. And those reasons can be given to the regulators. Microsoft, for example, is in the B category, where we'll say, hey, your request is too expensive, or your request is too extensive. You're asking for too much data. We cannot support that request, but if you tell me exactly what you're looking for, then I can accommodate that request. And that's where this piece comes in. So for the folks who say yes to B, this is the scenario that I quickly want to walk through. How much time do I have, Roy?
It's right up there. I guess.
So 41, so you wanted 20 in the end? So I got 20 more. Okay. Okay, so the scenario that I have is this. The EU employee comes in and says, I want you to give me my data. Let's say that in this particular scenario, the privacy officer negotiates with the employee and says, okay, we'll give you your data, but tell me exactly what you're looking for. And then what that effectively ends up happening is now it becomes an e-discovery case. It's pretty similar to a data subject request that is under DPA right now. But once it becomes a case, your litigation support gets involved, your attorney gets involved, and then finally the response is sent back to the subject. So if you're asking Microsoft, what are you doing for GDPR from a DSR standpoint? We are going to help you do this, right? And the solution that we have is our Office 365 e-discovery. Now, within e-discovery, we're launching a bunch of new features. Again, what you see at Ignite is one thing, but for the folks who are really interested in e-discovery, how many of you are really interested in e-discovery? Okay, good. At Legal Tech, we'll be doing a bunch of new demos. And I think Legal Tech's in January.
Yeah.
Right? So what you see over here, this is September. Out in January, our team is working really hard to make sure those scenarios are met. All right, so let's talk about e-discovery features in Office 365. Step 1, you have to go put a hold on stuff. For a DSR, typically, you don't need to put a hold because once you negotiate with the employee, it becomes the number of custodians is usually pretty low. But again, we do have the solution, so you can go put a hold on it. Then you collect the data. Then you do the minimization. And the minimization could simply be working within your in-house lit support, or working with external lit support, and figuring out exactly what the query should be. And within Microsoft, again, I think last year the number that I want to say is we had a total of 8 data subject requests, 8. And every customer that we've talked to, again, has said the number of DSRs that we've received, it's either 0 or single digit. Now, that might not be a good indicator of what's going to happen after GDPR, simply because of the fact that GDPR is getting so much publicity. But if there is anything to go by, those are the numbers that we have. So again, going back to the query, so you've got the query filtering, so you get a bunch of analysis done. And then finally, you've got the deduplication, threading, and the near-dupe identification, which culls the data even more. So you've got exactly the data that you're looking for. Finally, we'll help you export the data. Now, it says review over there, but then what it says down there, it says we export the data. Now, is Microsoft planning on building a review tool? At this point, no. We encourage you to work with partners for actually doing the review. And the review piece is very important, especially in the DSR scenario, simply because of the fact that you need to understand exactly what can be redacted, because it contains intellectual property of the company, cannot be shared with the employee. It may contain personal data of other folks in the organization, and therefore should not be given to the employee. So the review part is a little bit tricky. Now, at Legal Tech, I can tell you more confidently whether we are investing in review tools. But at this point, what we're saying is you should use our partners. And we've got a bunch of partners. Go to the eDiscovery session, look it up. Again, it'll give you a lot of information on our partner story for eDiscovery. OK, now I'll give you a classic scenario within Microsoft. And this is basically me doing a pitch for Microsoft eDiscovery. Inside Microsoft, if we had an original request that spanned 3 terabytes of information, we scope it down first, and then we do the minimization, which leads at 38 gigs. And then we do the advanced eDiscovery analysis. And finally, we get the stuff exported and then in our review tool. What does that actually translate to in numbers? If we had done what most people do in Office today, which is when the subject request comes in, export everything out, put it in the other tool, and then do eDiscovery over there, the total cost, $540,000. The middle row, the middle column, what it does is you first do E3 search within Office 365 eDiscovery. What that means is use our KQL. We've got condition cards. You use a bunch of those things. You filter the data down, and then you export it to the third-party solution. Now it costs $450,000. But if you use our advanced eDiscovery solution, where you take the data, you cull it first inside E3, then you run a bunch of analysis, you run themes, and you run dedupe and all that stuff, the total cost comes down to $250,000. This is a number that I'm not making it up. It's like 987 and 389. This is actual numbers from Microsoft. The main reason I put this up is we think that the cost of an E5 license can be offset with one case. And that's the main message that I want to give you over here. Now, you might still need review tools. I'm not saying you don't need it. But with our advanced eDiscovery tools, you can actually bring the cost down significantly. OK, so I've talked a bunch of stuff now about data protection, about data governance, about user protection, about breach, and finally, your data subject requests. Now, where is this all going to come together? So if you come into Microsoft Office 365, May 18th, and then say, hey, man, I need to know what to do for GDPR, what are we going to give you? So this is where the Security and Compliance Center comes in. So think of this as a recap of everything that I've talked about till now. Again, this is a deck that's available, so you should be able to download it. So remember the stuff that I talked about? So the top is data protection. Second, it's user protection. You've got breach, and then you've got requests, right? Now, assume that you actually have some data in there. What you're going to get is the stuff that you've labeled or not labeled, and because it's not labeled, you're not going to be covered by either retention or protection. That's what you see over here. Your users, again, now finally have a risk score associated with them based on the signals that we've been getting. And it gives you a story of how many users actually have some protection on them. With the threats, again, we give you insights into how many users are actively under threat. And then you've got your DSRs all in one place. Now, what does that look like? So you've got strong data protection, which is effectively encryption plus any block share or visual indicators. You've got the setting of a label, which effectively, with one click, what it's going to do is automatically apply this to any information that matches that sensitive type, apply a 2-year retention, and apply a block share externally. There, with one click, what you've done is you've enforced data protection at least on personal data, or category 1 of personal data. With your users, again, come on, zoom, there. Like I said earlier, we use a bunch of phishing signals, we use suspicious logins, and then determine the risk. And then, based on the risk, we suggest that you should go and do these things. This is what that looks like. So with simple one click, you will be able to apply protection. What that does is it turns on all the policies that I talked about earlier. And then finally, you've got the breach stuff, where I will, for demo purposes, give you a quick look at what that looks like, if my internet works. Yeah, no luck.
Nope.
It's all right. The breach stuff, again, please go look at Phil's session because it's incredibly cool, the threat dashboard and the threat explorer. While Roy's talking, I'll see if I can get that up and show you guys. Finally, you've got the data subject requests. Once you create a new DSR, we plan to create a bunch of tasks for your organization. So it's going to be super easy for you to actually walk through the steps. You can assign these roles to individual litigation support in your organization and say, hey, go do this step first. After this step is done, go and process the data, find out exactly how much data is going to show up because of this DSR, how much it's going to cost us for this DSR, and then make the decision as to whether to proceed with the DSR or not. And then finally do the search, do the analysis, and then do the review where you're screening for privileged content, intellectual property, and then finally give the information back to the user. So, so just to summarize, yes? Yep. So the question was, what I just showed you, is it going to be part of the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center? Since GDPR is coming in May, what I'm showing you here is an early version of it. More in mocks, we've got development going on right now, which is why when Roy gets on stage, what he's going to do is talk to you about a roadmap. And in the roadmap, you'll see what is landing when. And if that's not disclosed, at least today. Say that again?
Why it will be done on Monday? Because it's already there?
I did not get that. Sorry. Oh, it was a joke. My bad. I'm thinking too much about threats right now. Sorry. Yeah. No. The answer is we'll have a T-3 months and a T-1 month launch window as well, where we'll be actually announcing these things, where these things will be going to GA. So expect it in Q1 2018. That's the answer I want to give you.
Good stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Can you actually come to the mic, please, because you're too far away?
Oops.
Hi.
Yep.
The question is, if the DSR results in a document which has a PCI data, how you deliver the data from
It
your
has what data?
PCI data, credit card,
Okay.
Or
how you
personal
deliver
data.
that outside your organization, in what format you deliver it?
So, I had an export slide. I took that out last minute. No, so we export the data in the form that it is in right now. Now, the export tools, we're also building in a bunch of stuff around scanning for sensitive information. But at this point of time, we're just going to give it as it is. And in your export tool, that's what I mentioned earlier, any privileged information, any intellectual property or personal data of other folks, you'll have to use the review tool to redact that stuff. So that is what we're saying. Sorry.
Sure, thanks.
So it's ensuring that you then want to pass it to the data subject in an encrypted format that they can access and might recommend Azure Information Protection for them.
So I actually wanted to ask one more question. GDPR also has this forget me scenario. Now, if you go back to the slide that I had earlier, which I should do, and I was being sneaky about that earlier. I was trying to see if anyone noticed that. I said accommodate all data requests. And what I mean by that is view, export, and delete. How many of you are actually going to say yes to delete requests in their Office 365 data? There's
Maybe
like
depends.
two of
Yeah,
you?
a couple, three, yeah.
Yeah, 2 or 3 of you. So you guys do have a policy to effectively say, no, delete is not going to happen. That's, again, good to know because that is the hardest engineering problem that I have to solve. And again, it helps me kind of stage things in a better way if I know this. So thank you again for your feedback. So yes, any other questions about this? DSRs and policies. Again, we'll be publishing a bunch of white papers around this. We'll be telling people what Microsoft plans to do for DSRs. Again, what we've noticed is it differs from company to company. So one thing I would actually recommend is for you guys in this room to talk to each other, find out who are the guys who are saying, yes, I will show you all my data, or the guys who say, yes, I will delete all the data. Find out why they are doing that. And at some point, we should all arrive at one conclusion, because today, everybody's saying different things. But at least what I see from the audience is the majority is B, and the number of deletes is minimal. All right, so I think we're good. Now, I'll hand it off to you, Roy.
Okay, great. Well, I'd want to take a bit of a step back, and we'll have more time for questions. But let me go and start with some audience polls and just sort of get a better sense of who's here. Relative to the GDPR in your organization, which team has been assigned the primary responsibility? And we'll just do a quick show of hands, and of course, D is any of the above, as long as it's you. But if it's legal or compliance, sort of already have a privacy team. Just a handful. Okay, yeah, third. Okay, all right. Security, CISO, or anyone else? Okay, a little quarter. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so maybe a quarter, 20 or so people on that side, and then IT is really sitting there. 30, maybe a little around that. Yeah. And then anyone in the room? See, we're guys. All right, I'll buy you a drink. I know you're paying. So we have, so obviously you all understand, this is, whose responsibility is it? It's everybody's responsibility. It's not just a one issue or one domain problem. And so really important is we, give you guidance and direction that you sync and synthesize that with the rest of your organization. Because a lot of the things that we can enable will really determine what your policies are for, implementing that. So we have, I just wanted to point out Microsoft.com/GDPR, which is where we're putting ultimately all of the assets and guidance that we have for any of the products, for any of the services that we have. And again, depending on what you need from Microsoft or sort of where you want, what our role is within your broader footprint or platform, we will, of course, as we've said, meet our commitments to the regulators and the GDPR as a data controller and a data processor on your behalf. But really what we're trying to do is look at ways that we can take the great tooling and the intelligence, the AI that's being built, and give that to you in ways that will help you accelerate your GDPR journey and requirements. So I'm talking today in sort of about Microsoft 365, because really Office 365 is the head of a new train that now includes Windows and enterprise mobility and security. And what that's done is it's really kind of brought together what used to be a whole bunch of different fragmented systems that, if you're using any legacy corollaries today, they may not have been designed with the modern compliance and security standards in place. So what we're doing is bringing together this most complete platform of employee productivity or the modern workplace across email and file shares and chats and all of that we can govern and put into a single cloud service. So that platform is something that the apps and the data that people use every day has got those built-in compliance and security controls. So that's a good. We think it's a good place to start. Yes, sir.
How do we handle data that is on paper? Because paper is also part of the GDPR, so they store personal information in paper and in other systems.
Mm-hmm. Good question. I think for the long answer, let's take it offline and sort of talk about some of the scenarios. But I mean, it's a good point that your data is going to be in a lot of different places, in a lot of different forms, some readable, some manageable, and we'll have to make some business decisions about whether it's better to create a compliance boundary around those sources of data, or move that, change that policy or move it into a system that is compliant. So whether using OCR or some other.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
I'll quickly answer that question. So it falls under what we call physical records management, almost. And with physical records management, what we're telling our customers right now is you rely on partners. We've got a bunch of partners like Gimel and AvePoint who are down there. You should go check out their physical records management solution. But the crux of it is you have to scan the data, or at least put the metadata in SharePoint lists or something. Yep. And once you have these retention policies and labels that I showed you earlier, use that to apply to the actual metadata entry in the list. Now, what Gimel and AvePoint have done is they've integrated advanced data governance through that to the physical record system. And therefore, we've now got the full cycle of integration with advanced data governance. So you should go check their booth out, or go check out the session that Nishan, who's standing in the corner, did. He did a session with advanced data governance with the guys from Gimel. Again, great session. You should go check that out.
Yeah, a lot of good scenarios, and again, sort of points to, you're going to have SQL databases on-prem, Oracle, this whole sort of range that you will need to think about. Personal data could live all sorts of places. So in general, think about how you can bring, and consolidate and simplify as many of those systems as you can. And particularly, as Deepak pointed out, your employees are a special case. They're citizens, you have to care about personal data about them. They're authenticated users, there's log data, there's telemetry data about that. But they also have access to all of those other systems, and they have ways like email and et cetera of getting that data out. So really important that across the whole universe of personal data and data subjects they have to manage, we're really looking at Microsoft 365 and Office 365 as that way of managing and protecting that data that's used and accessed by employees. So the second, and as part of that, and I'll go in, data residency is a common topic we hear. There's nothing specific to the GDPR that talks about specific geographic requirements. It talks about standards and comparability. But we know that a lot of users, whether you're international, whether you've got offices that for other regulations you need to keep in a specific country or a specific region. We've announced some new multi-geo capabilities and other improvements to help you sort of manage and keep data and users in the locations that make sense for you and your business needs. The operational security, this is one that I know we've had a lot of really change in the customer conversation over years, but really in the last, this year, especially the last 6 months, where large defense agencies, government agencies, global banks are saying, yes, Microsoft, you really are spending more money. You really are putting a better security around the data centers than even we are. So that has accelerated the move. And as part of that is, we're taking some of that shared responsibility and helping you with these aspects of sort of the built-in security and compliance, from the, built protect, detect and respond all the way through. So that we say, there's a lot of that stuff that will come kind of built in, and we want to provide some visibility to you and show you that you can, again, validate yourself that Microsoft is indeed staying compliant and giving you insight into this compliance posture. And so we announced earlier this week Compliance Manager, which is going to be a new tool as part of the Service Trust portal. And it's going to be a one-stop shop for all of the compliance information and actions that you will need to be able to take across Microsoft. So what you can see in a couple of these things is that for each service, for each type of standard that we support, and of course GDPR will be one, but also even today we have this information available for ISO 2007-1, 2018, FedRAMP, NIST, et cetera. So if I go into one of those and actually want to look at what is this dashboard telling me about, I'm again going to be able to see which of the services are in this, are in scope or included in this. So if I have data in Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint, and Delve and Video and Sway and Planner and all of that, yes, all of that's going to be covered in this one view. And at the bottom, you can see these are the Microsoft-owned controls, the things that we are responsible for. Like I mentioned, that data center security and access control. We have that audited by third parties. We make those audits available. We tell you when they were last passed. And in some cases, we actually have, this is from an old finding, but in the case where there is a finding and there is an issue, we actually will describe, okay, how was this issue tested? What was the plan? What is our response? What have we done to mitigate the risk? What do we think the actual impact to this, of this specific control is going to be? So all of this data is going to be great in sort of sharing Microsoft's view, but the other big advantage of the Compliance Manager is it's going to show you the recommended customer controls that you can configure and define so that you can then show your regulators that you're demonstrating compliance. So we will be adding incremental controls from data subject requests, and forget me as being one example, where we're going to have fairly detailed guidance around what are the actions that you're going to need to be able to accomplish in order to achieve or to implement that control. And in this tool, actually be able to assign a user to go out and develop those processes and procedures, implement that control, and actually test and save the documentation in here so that you have a record of all of those activities. So as again, whether you're the administrator and then being able to assign, these tasks or what, we need an IT pro or a compliance, program manager to be able to go and do, they'll then be able to, see the tasks that are assigned to them. What is it that they should be, what is it they should be doing? Able to add attachments themselves and sort of keep that as part of the audit log that's going on. And then ultimately, as that gets back to the Compliance Manager, they'll be able to set the status and the records of each of those different controls. So again, the benefit of that is, at the end of the day, you're just going to have one place, all of these things all these controls in one set. However, sort of complex you want to be able to, delegate the different tasks and containers that you have, but you'll be able to just do a one-click export and then to get all of that data in a place that you can then just hand over to the regulator. Or if you're a large organization and you use a GRC tool like Archer or others, and again, you just want to use an API to be able to interrogate this and pull it into your own system so that you have broad visibility across your organization. This is the tool that, from a GDPR perspective, we're going to use to just showcase, well, here are the things in the service and what Microsoft's responsibilities are and what your responsibilities are as part of the service. Any questions on Compliance Manager? There was a session, there's a blog, there's a whole lot of videos, but happy to talk about that too at the end if there are any specific questions. As we're, I'm just going to keep rolling through here and talk about some of the other aspects of, again, we're looking at this from a Microsoft 365 perspective, which is obviously sort of rooted in Office 365 and the data that you have stored in there. And the more data that's in the cloud, the more we can reason over it, the more tools and services that we can provide to you. But our vision, and what Deepak referred to earlier, is our vision for Microsoft information protection and the way that it serves as foundation for even more advanced data governance activities. This spreads across all types of files, and to help you discover, protect, and govern that data wherever it lives, in Microsoft's cloud and in a third-party cloud, on-prem, and another file share, et cetera. So those are really the basis tools that, again, are interconnected. They already work together. You don't need 17 different things to look at different silos of information. So again, whatever technology you want to bet on, it needs to be able to accomplish this thing and ultimately make the job of governing data across these different file systems, across these different sources, make it easier so GDPR actually becomes achievable. And that's where, again, for those areas that are becoming just beyond the possibility of manual processes, of traditional, sort of workflow to keep up, that's where some of the, AI-assisted tools in Microsoft 365 really shine. And there's sessions, breakouts on each one of these. As we mentioned, that will go, deep into the foundations and all of the new features and capabilities that are launching across, Azure Active Directory and Intune, the new threat protections across Windows, Azure, Office 365, from email going into documents. Amazing, innovation that's happening on that side. But ultimately, again, sort of consolidating and simplifying, your management and sort of what IT, how many different places IT has to go to get control and to understand what's happening within your environment. So again, it's not necessarily going to be 100% of your footprint, but the more that that you can use these tools to help with that single, governance program, the easier it's going to be for you to implement and manage that. So just, to kind of summarize and kind of, lay out the road ahead as we talk about it, this journey, we've been at Microsoft working for over a year, on implementing controls and features in our service. And so we still have more work to do in, updating, delivering that. So we made a lot of announcements here at Inspire. Excuse me, I always do that once. At Ignite.
Ignite.
Ignite and Envision. And really sort of set what we believe is that foundation so that you can get started today on getting up to speed with Office and understanding Microsoft 365 and what are all of the components about. And that is ready today. And again, we meet more regulatory certifications than any other cloud provider. So the Compliance Manager, the tool that I just showed you a little demo of, that's going to come in preview for your tenants in November, is what we're saying now, by the end of the year. But the 6-month anniversary is November, so we're really keeping that in mind. And then additional support, for these data governance scenarios and the broader information protection. There's a lot of, far too much to put on one slide here. So hundreds of new features and capabilities coming throughout the end of the year. And then early in Q1, so early in the new year, that's when we really plan to sort of make all of our customer-facing services available to you. So the data subject right tools that we spoke about, and all of the guidance about what we are and aren't doing and supporting of that will be available early in the new year to give you time to sort of digest that and to update your compliance programs, et cetera. So by the deadline, of course, we will have all these controls up. We will have them implemented, audit ready. It will just become part of our standard operating procedure, and we'll be looking forward to whatever the UK and Singapore and whatever other regulatory region decides to do next.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
So questions in the back?
Yes, you have a couple hundred terabytes that you're about to upload. Just for fun, we don't have anything up there yet. But in like 2 months, we're going to have a couple hundred terabytes up there.
Sure.
Are you going to implement objects that we need to,
Sanjay, you want to come and answer the question?
Yeah, can you just so
come
we
to
have
the
it on
mic.
the
Come to the mic.
recording?
So Sanjay is another PM on our team. He's particularly responsible for importing data into 365. He can talk to you about that. Just speak, yeah.
So, so like Deepak said, we have a certain set of capabilities today that we make available to customers who are trying to migrate data from, different platforms on premises. And we have some filters where you can take a proactive action around saying, I want to leave data that's older than 2 years behind. I don't want to bring it in. And so there's some basic levels of that intelligence that you can put in when you're bringing in data. The other kind of feedback that we've gotten from customers is, if I have some sensitive data in my data set that I'm bringing over to Office 365, I want to be able to filter that out as well. And so those are some of the additional filter capabilities that we're looking at to bring into that same import pipeline process.
But to answer, so the answer is yes through partners.
Yeah, today.
Yes through partners because it's the same guys like Gimel and AvePoint that we're working with, where the API to bring in has the ability to label stuff. So you can effectively say, if this metadata, you're creating a rule that says, if this metadata is true, then put this label on it. If the other metadata is true, put a different label on it. We're working with partners right now. But if you want, the other solution for you is bring it all in and then run a process that runs in 365. Again, that's an option as well. And bringing it all in is super easy because we support Drive Shipping, we support Azure Express Route. So those things make it really easy to bring the data in.
And another principle is that we're not, and again, for most things, we're adding on to or evolving the discovery and other tools. So there's no thing that we'll come out with that isn't integrated or interoperable with everything that's been done, and all the labeling and classification that you've set up before.
Yep. So before we close, I just had one last question for the audience. Remember where I had this slide where I think, let me bring that up because it's the personal data slide. How many of you are actually going to say okay to personal data that involves what I've been doing, which is number 3? Raise of hands, please. Will you say yes to an employee requesting this data from you? Yes for a raise of hands? No for a raise of hands? It depends for a raise of hands? Come on. Okay. Anyone want to say what it depends on?
Or what issue they're struggling with?
Because this is going to be an interesting problem for us, at least in the engineering team, like I said. If I'm going to give you 8,000 pages for one user and one email, I just want to understand what it is that you guys are looking for when you guys say it depends. So anyone wants to volunteer, answer the question? Otherwise, I'll pick someone at random. Okay, yeah.
I mean, a lot of it has to do with, in that negotiation back and forth, they may be asking for, I was making transactions on a given day, or I was having conversations with a particular person that I want to track.
I see.
So it's part of that negotiation as to what information they're trying to get.
Got it. So, but you're never going to say all the stuff that you've ever worked on. Okay, that's a little bit more scoped again. Okay, that makes sense. Anybody else? Different answer from what he said, or everybody agrees? If you agree with everything he said, raise your hand. Yes?
Well, it depends if it's internal data or external communication with partners and customers.
Okay.
Why should I give them information?
Got it. But at some point, you still have to figure out what that information is to make that decision. Okay, so you do need the tools for that then, right? It's just going to influence our engineering decisions. That's all it is. Okay, that's good to know. And you guys have been really amazing. Thanks for being so interactive with us. Yes?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't get any questions.
I thought I got away with it.
It doesn't matter the question. I'm sorry. The answer is E5. Answers all the questions.
No, I think, Roy, you should, I don't know how.
Yeah, well, I would say there's a couple of dimensions. In principle, like we said, meeting compliance has always been part of our core commitment. It's one of the principles that we have. So compliance, it doesn't matter if you are on Exchange Online Plan 1, you will have all the guarantees and benefits from us and our compliance efforts, and the compliance manager and those tools to be able to provide the basics of managing and protecting your data. The more help you want, like in the case of advanced data governance, like you can use search, you can crawl through all of that, you can pay someone else to do it on your behalf, or again, you can use our latest and greatest machine learning and AI capabilities to do that on your behalf faster and more effectively than a human could. So that's sort of how we think about tiering the different capabilities, and obviously the new stuff that's taking the most extreme expertise is where what's going into the E5 SKUs.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
So
Do you have a nice breakdown of if you're E3, these are the parts that will help you with GDPR portions. Your E5, this part of GDPR.
Yes.
Specific.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
we'll go ahead.
I would say, do you have a direct account team? Do you work with a partner? Because there has been new licensing guidance that's been being made available to talk about some of the specific GDPR scenarios. But most of the existing stuff, like I said, we'll go through that we've touched on: e-discovery, information protection, threat protection. They should be able to talk to you about from any position to any position.
Yeah, you'll see it in data protection, what you get for E1, E3, E5, governance, what you get for E1, E3, E5, so on and so forth. So those are published right now. Again, if you're not able to locate it, feel free to reach out to either one of us. Are we supposed to give out our email addresses over here?
If you want.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Yeah, I was going to say, even if you just want to look on the Microsoft 365 licensing deck, or ask any one of us, we can make sure you get a copy.
Yeah. All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Happy.